Hello, everybody. Hi, this is Gregory Roberts. We are celebrating today. We are celebrating 6 months on the air. And wait a minute, before you turn that dial, we have a show for you. So please, what I need you to do is listen because we're going to talk about some stuff today. Also, I need you to share this on Facebook because we're going to tackle one of the things that this country we need to tackle is racism. And for any of you people that say that it does not exist, you're wrong. Okay, joining me hold on. I'm getting ahead of myself. You're welcome to Touring the 2 Year Political Show. Hi, I'm your host Gregory Roberts. 6 month anniversary. I'm really happy. We've only missed 2 weeks, and that was because of the holidays. I want to thank the radio station for giving us this opportunity to bring you the truth, breaking the glass and getting rid of the smoke to get rid of the truth in politics. Now, if you're listening on the radio and would like to take part of the show, what you can do is go to Facebook, WVS 103.7 The Beat, or M106 Soul, the old school soul, and you can go there and you can write your questions down and be involved in the show. Let me introduce the guests. No top 10 today. I just want to say real quick about the people in Texas and down south. Keep your prayers, for those people. And you know what? Suicides are up. Depression is up. Call somebody and check on somebody. Please do that because people are struggling in this country. And I'm going to introduce my co-host. He's been on the radio on our program lots of times and will be on. I consider him a great friend, Pastor Joe Lane II. How you doing, sir?
I'm well, man. How are you?
I'm doing well. It's 25 degrees and snowing, and I'm telling you, I'm so tired of snow.
Hey, I'm not made for this. My people are from the tropics. I tell people that all the time. I'm made for this.
I'm not made for this. But you know what we are made for? We are made for this show. People, I want you to get an ink pen. Now, I've gave you a couple commands. Number one, get a pad of paper. Share this message right now because this is going to be a Kairos moment, a life-changing moment for some of you. Now, the person that we have on, the book right here. It's a green book, green screen. I can't do that. Through White Eyes, Color and Racism in Vermont. And some of you might say, what does Vermont have to do with Michigan? You're going to find out. His other book is called The Other America, The African American Experience. Put your hands together for the man of the hour, Robert L. Walsh. How you doing, sir?
Well, thank you very much. That's a nice introduction, probably more than I deserve, but I thank you very much.
First of all, I want to thank you for your service in the military, and we really want to thank you because you retired as a lieutenant general,
lieutenant colonel.
Yeah. So in the Marine Corps. Simplify, hoorah!
Well, thank you.
And so we want to thank you for your service. Also, I want to thank you for this book. We just got these books, and I can't put it down. And people, like I said, the only way that we're going to be able to deal with racism is dialogue and talking, honest talk. And so we're going to get right into the problem. Let's break that glass, get rid of the smoke, and dive into the program. Mr. Robert Walsh, sir, we've said you wrote this book. What made you write this book?
Well, it's when after I retired from the Marines, I was teaching school at South Burlington High School. I was teaching history, and they had a course on the schedule to be taught, which it was only taught every 2 years, but it was called Black History, and the department chairman sort of forgot about the course, and he came to me just before Christmas vacation, and said, "Hey, Bob, will you teach this course?" Well, I agreed, knowing nothing about African American history. Okay, so I was a typical teacher who went home, read the book, made up the lesson plans, and went to work the next day and started teaching the course.
Mm-hmm.
But over the course of the next 18, 19 years, I learned more about African American history than my kids did, I think. It was a terrific educational experience for me and for the students. So I got very interested in the program, and we talked a lot about racism. Our school mascot was called the Rebels, and the symbol was the Confederate flag, if you can believe that, up here in Vermont. And so we tried to, starting in about 1980, I started talking to students and asking them, well, what do you think of this? And students began to realize that was rather inappropriate symbol for the school. Well, they tried to eliminate it, but it didn't get gone. It wasn't taken away. So it wasn't taken away until 2018. I'll tell you about that later.
Mm-hmm.
But why I wrote this book was that in 1999, the U.S. Advisory Committee, or the Vermont Advisory Committee to the U.S. Commission on Civil Rights, published this rather lengthy report about racial harassment in Vermont's public schools. And it was a scathing expose. So naturally, the legislature had hearings on it, or they appointed a committee to study to come up with some answers. And so I wasn't in the legislature then. I had been in the legislature before for about 6 years, but I knew most of the people down there.
Mm-hmm.
So I went down to listen to the hearings, and I saw this parade of African American parents come before the committees telling what happened to their kids in school. And much to my disgust, the members of the commission, their general response to that was, "You must be exaggerating. This doesn't happen in Vermont. We don't have racism in Vermont." So I got the idea, if that's the way you guys are going to be, I'm going to write a book. And by that time, in those days, I was a middle-aged old white man. Now I'm an old white man. But I thought, I will write a book as a white man who's had all the benefits of being white, and maybe they'll listen to me. So I put together this book, and I deliberately called it Through White Eyes, because I think it was my eyes that we were seeing it on.
Mm-hmm.
And when I wrote the book, it wasn't a book for profit. I gave copies to the members, each member of the Senate and House Education Committees, and then to the governor, and to anybody who would take a copy of it.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought that might result in change. 2 years later, I asked the governor what he thought of the book. He said, "I haven't had time to read it."
Wow.
So what I did then was I put in a bill in the legislature to have Black history. Well, let me digress a bit. I have to go back to this book here, Through the Other America. When Leon Burrell and I wrote that, we wrote that with the idea that it would be a supplement to textbooks used in Vermont schools.
Mm-hmm.
As most academic U.S. history textbooks don't talk about African American history to any extent. So we wrote that book, and talked to the Commissioner of Education. He thought it was a good book, but unfortunately, then he left his job. He got sick sick and had to leave his job. So we wrote to the superintendents of the various schools and sent them a copy of the book, and made an offer for them that we would provide the book at cost, and that Leon and I would then come free of charge and explain to their staff how it could be used.
Mm-hmm.
Because we believe that it was, well, we got no responses, no replies. So then after I wrote this book, Through White Eyes, I wasn't getting any response. So that's when I put a bill into the legislature to have a 3-credit course in African American history be required for teachers before they get a license.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Well, that never got out of committee, and that was in 2006, in 2007. I put it in again in 2009, and again in 2011. And that never got out of committee. I made discussions with the people on the committees and so forth. Never got out of committee. The general response was, we don't really need that. That's not all that important. Meanwhile, this book was racial harassment document was sitting on a shelf someplace.
Huh.
So in today's environment, right now we have a bill before the legislature that is called H-79. And let me just tell you what it does. It's a very simple book, 1 page. It says, to get a license, you have to complete an approved course, a 3-credit course in African American history. The course must cover the period from the European colonization of North America through the end of the 20th century, which is exactly what this book here covers.
Mm-hmm.
And another book by Lerone Bennett, Before the Mayflower, which is an excellent book, also covers. The idea was, the big topic these days is racism, and we've had an awful lot of discussion about racism, and everybody says, well, we'll do it in the schools. The unfortunate part is nobody in the schools knows anything about African American history. I won't say nobody, but a lot of people don't.
Very few.
Most of the teachers don't.
Very few.
And what we're doing is we're putting the teachers in a very awkward position because they're being held accountable. If a kid uses the N-word in class, the administrator will say to the teacher, what's going on in your class? Why aren't you controlling this? Well, if the teacher hasn't got this understanding, I mean, if you have a situation like that, or any other racial situation, you can use it as a teaching moment.
Mm-hmm.
If you have the information. For example, if in the science classes, you can talk about Thomas Edison if you want.
Mm-hmm.
And we all know who Thomas Edison is, but do we know who Garrett Morgan is?
Come on now.
Huh? So Mr. Morgan has had as many patents as Thomas Edison. He was also the guy who invented the traffic light. So I'll say to kids, you drive a car? Yeah. Have you ever gone through a red light? Yeah. Who invented that? I haven't got a clue. Well, Garrett Morgan did. Well, the math teacher could be talking about Benjamin Banneker in his classroom, but they can't do it if they don't have any understanding of it, if they've never been exposed to it. Now, my experience as a white man growing up in the public school system, I never was taught any of that. I heard about slavery. I heard about some particular Booker T. Washington. I think I heard about.
The usual.
The usual, but I never had a good understanding of it. I didn't know that in World War I, the segregated army over there, when the Black Unit 54th Regiment from New York got over to World War I, they were transferred to the French unit. And if you see pictures of African American soldiers in World War One, they're wearing French helmets
Hmm.
because the commanding general there of the U.S. forces said, "Well, black isn't a color of the rainbow," and it was the division over there was called the Rainbow Division. So those are things that people need to know, and if a teacher isn't exposed to this, how can they pass it on to their students? My experience with this in the classroom was that my students that I had, my course was just a one semester course. It was an elective. I teach it twice a year. It was an elective course. So I normally had sophomores and juniors and seniors in the class, all volunteers. And they're pretty sharp kids. As we went along and as they went along in the program, began understanding it, I found that their attitudes changed toward racism. And not just toward racism, toward other types of discrimination, toward LGBT people. One of the things that one of the slang words that was very popular in the 80s and 90s was called homosexuals fags.
Yeah.
And one of the best days I ever heard, one of the best days for me in school was I walked down the corridor, I heard a kid call another kid by that name. Before I could say anything, one of my students walked up and said, "That's not right.
Mm-hmm.
Don't you know that that's hurtful?" And this was one of the students who was in our Black History class.
Wow.
Attitudes change.
Yes.
Wow.
So,
Now
so
Bob,
that's a long answer to why did I write the book?
now Bob, the makeup of Vermont is what far is white, and how many minorities are? I think you speak about it in.
Well, we have it's over 90% white. We have a small. We have some Hispanics. We have some African Americans. We have some people from refugees from the middle, not mid east, but from Central Europe. We have people, refugees from Africa, but very small group.
The reason why I asked you that question is that Pastor Joe Lane, you in your school district, talk a little bit about what you do and what you represent in your school district.
Yeah. So and it's great to be on with you. And Greg, did you say you had copies of the book?
Well, what we're gonna have to do is we're gonna have to buy.
Okay. I just need to know how to get it. I actually tried to find it earlier. So
it's on Amazon.
It's on Amazon.
I looked and I didn't see it, so I'll look again. So my role, my responsibility is my technical title is I'm the stakeholder engagement specialist. So anyone who's engaged in our school district, I engage with them. I'm the PR guy. I do positive behavior interventions, support kids with that, support teachers. But most recently, I've also added doing some work with diversity and inclusion and equity. And so we're working through this. But I also work in a school district that is about 86% white. And
that's in Muskegon County.
Right. Well, Muskegon is like the 19th most segregated city in the country. When you can go to a 98% white or black community, and then 5 miles later you're in a 98% white community, that just shows the segregation and the dissonance that's still here. Mm-hmm. But I'm just really intrigued because we're starting to do some really amazing stuff in our district that I think. But Mr. Walsh, one of the questions I wanted to ask you, just as I was listening to you talk, was, so if you're in an area that's 98% white, I can't imagine you don't have people that say we don't need this because that's not really about us. Yeah. How do you respond? I mean, because really I'm trying to be respectful. That's a fair question to people who don't understand that need.
Well, it's a very fair question. I'm asked it all the time. When I speak, I'm not speaking an awful lot now, but after the books came out, I would speak to church groups and social groups and Rotary clubs and stuff like that. And they would say, why are we considering this? Because it's not, we don't have racism here. And my answer to them is quite bluntly, yes, you do. And then give them some specific examples from this book,
Mm-hmm.
about where this happened. When I was teaching at University of Vermont, there's a guy, African American friend of mine, who is a professor. He's a PhD professor, and he told me his first day on the job, he was in his classroom, and he was wearing like I have clothes on,
No,
And what happened to him? A guy came in and says, "Make sure you got that
That is
place
a
cleaned up before the professor gets here."
Uh,
listen. I knew exactly what you were going to say before you said it.
I saw you laughing.
I was the assistant principal at our school, and I had a parent come in during conferences, and I had on a suit, and she asked me if I could get into her kid's locker because she thought I was a janitor. She asked me if I was a janitor.
unreal.
Yeah.
Unreal.
So these things happen all the time. I find that I'm going to say something. I'm going to delve into a subject here that maybe I hope it doesn't offend anybody. But
we're here,
because Pastor Joe,
we're here to tell the truth.
Pastor Joe, your title, you said you're working on equity, diversity, and
Inclusion.
so yeah, and I understand that, but I have a chapter in here. It's chapter 4. It talks about anti-racism, multicultural education, diversity, and this is the one that kept me in trouble. The diversity dodge.
Yeah, speak on that. Speak on that.
What happens on that is that I coined that phrase because I found when I was going around, I was trying to get this bill on licensing passed, and I talked to the Department of Education. I talked to the professional educators associations, all kinds of people. And what I found when I get into and before the legislature too, in the committees, invariably what happens after I get my pitch done about why it's important for teachers to understand African American history, invariably the next question is, well, what about LBG crew? What about guys who are handicapped? What about all this other? And pretty soon, the conversation mushrooms into where nothing gets done.
Mm-hmm.
And the dodge is for most of that is legitimate, many of these questions, but the person who wants to dodge, the perfect way to change the subject from talking about racism, which nobody wants to use that word, is to slant it off in some other direction and to make sure that you get so convoluted that you're not going to accomplish a thing. A good example is right here. I got someplace here a copy of when this book was put out, the book about racial harassment in public schools. After all the things were done, after 3 or 4 years of study, the legislature finally passed a bill on bullying, which had nothing to do with racism, but that satisfied the public.
Come on, because it doesn't happen in Vermont.
But I think that you see that. How did you say it? Dodging. What did you give me the phrase again?
I said the diversity dodge.
The diversity dodge. Yeah. So I think that diversity dodge happens in a multiplicity of ways. We were just talking. Yeah. So I just finished a 6-week book study on another book on race with about 30 folks from our community here, which was really awesome. But one of the things that we talked about was how we de-empower movements or things that are vital. And so we were actually talking about the Black Lives Matter movement. And however you think about the Black Lives Matter movement isn't really even an issue. But what happens when now you have Black Lives Matter, All Lives Matter, Blue Lives Matter? Somebody had a bumper sticker that said Black Smokes Matters because they are a person who likes diesel trucks. And now what you've done is you've diluted any
Diluted.
weight of that. And so, and that's your the dodge that you're talking about again. And
Exactly.
I think we have that happen all the time.
You know, the encouraging thing is, I see, when you mentioned Black Lives Matter, that's a perfect example of the dodge, you know, the way that's being done. People are coming up with that. But what's so encouraging to me is that in Vermont here, we've had something like 8 schools, the students themselves insisting that the Black Lives flag flies.
Mm.
And they met with great resistance from the administrations and stuff, but they persisted. And now in our school in South Burlington, the flag is up now. The first school to put it up was the one in Montpelier, which is where the state capitol is.
Mhm.
The kids down there put up the Black Lives Matter flag, and it was it was just a mess with the public. The public, you know, oh, this is terrible. This is terrible. What are you doing that for? But it's coming on. I see great hope in the younger generations. I really do.
Bob,
I just
you talked about you, growing up that you knew nothing, and then you went into the military. But what really changed you? Speak about that Kairos moment that changed you in Vietnam.
Okay. I went in the Marine. I joined the Marines in 1955, and as a little background before I get to this particular thing, I my parents taught me a lot about being equality and not to judge people and so forth. But I didn't really have a handle on it. And I'd heard about segregation, but I didn't. I had an uncle from Virginia who, with his drawl and his, he'd come up and he'd tell us, "Oh, how great it is down there. They live on a plantation and stuff." But when I went down to Quantico, Virginia in 1955, I had a friend. His name was Joe Thomas, a black Marine who was in officer candidate school with me, and we became friends, and he really helped me out because I didn't know anything about the military. He'd been in for about 2 or 3 years, so he showed me how to do a lot of stuff. Well, we were finally allowed to go into Washington D.C. on a weekend. Went down to the train station, and I got to the train station, and there it was, colored, white, and Joe had to go in the colored section. Well, I went in with him.
Mm.
And he said, "You really ought not do this, Bob." but I did. We went in. So then, as the years went on in the Marines, I found that you'd see some racist activities. We had a fight out in Camp Pendleton between the Hispanics and the blacks, and the answer to it was to have a formation and have the senior sergeant who was black and a senior sergeant who was Mexican go out and shake hands in front of the troops, and that was the end of it. When I went to London, a station over there, we had one black trooper, and the big talk among the officers' wives was, "Is he going to take a white girl to the Marine Corps ball?" You know, that type of stuff. But I didn't really, and you know, this all happened around me. I knew it was wrong. I didn't do anything about it. But when I got into Vietnam, I was sent down to a battalion. I was a major then, and I was sent as the executive officer of the 2nd Battalion, 7th Marines. And we were down in a place called Landing Zone Ross, which is about 35 miles southwest of Da Nang. And we were out pretty much in nowhere. A battalion of Marines is roughly 12 to 1,500 people when you get all attachments and stuff. I got off the helicopter, and I was met by a lieutenant who gave me a crisp salute and welcome to the place. We're walking across the tarmac, and I looked over, and I saw a Confederate flag flying. So I asked this lieutenant, I said, "What's that?" He says, "Oh, that's the radio people." I said, So then we were walking further, and I saw a black flag flying. I said, "Well, what's that flag?" And he answered with the N word. That's where they live. And I stopped him right there and said, "You're not going to never use that word again in my presence." Went up to get to meet the guy I was relieving, and he was too busy. He said hello and was ready to get out of there. And he handed me a list and said, "These are the 5 guys who are going to try and kill you." And I looked at that, and there were 5 names on it. I turned to this, and the guy took off then. This major, he took off. So I turned to the lieutenant. I said, "Who are these guys?" He says, "Oh, they're all the African-American guys who were badasses." So I did a couple of things. First thing, I had all the flags taken down. And if they wanted to put up a flag, they could have put up a Marine Corps flag. Fortunately, I had the authority to do these things, in that I knew the commanding officer, who was a friend of mine. I went and told him, I said, "This is what I'm going to do." And he said, "Okay." So to break up the sleeping areas, because the blacks were living in one area and the whites were living in another area, and there was tension all over the place. What I did was, in the evening, first night I was there, I went down on the lines, and the lines were, our defensive perimeter was totally inadequate. So what I did was, I just had everybody go down on the defensive positions at night by unit, and that immediately integrated them. And that was the end of that. So it was there had been the day before, a week before I got down there, the racism was so bad in that place that one day there was a sergeant, and this was told to me by the commanding officer, so I have no reason to doubt it. The sergeant, who was a racist from South Carolina, had a habit of going to the head at 5:30 in the morning. And one morning he didn't go there, the head at 5:30 in the morning. A lieutenant did. And when the lieutenant opened the door, a grenade went off.
Wow.
Which was designed for that sergeant. And it killed the lieutenant.
Wow.
And that's how serious this thing was. And so after I got the situation where we integrated all the areas, I then made it a point to seek out those 5 guys who were on the list. And what I did was, I made sure I caught them alone.
Right.
And so the 2 of us got together, just man to man. And I set them down, and I said, "I'm new broom in town, corporal or sergeant or private or whoever the hell he was." I said, "What's going on here?" And for some reason, they trusted me, and they told me. And I couldn't believe it. And I'll summarize it by saying that after talking to those 5 guys, I was shocked. And that was a life-changing experience for me, because we're all in a very dangerous situation. We all had problems. My wife at that time, who's since passed, was home in the hospital with cancer. One of the guys I talked to, his wife had just lost a baby. We all had these problems, and we're all in this together. If I didn't get shot, but if I had got shot, I'd have blood red. And it's just like the African-American kid. There was no difference. And I was really ashamed that the leadership and the leaders that were leading these guys were treating these guys that way. So what I did was, I just held school with my officers, all of whom were white. And we made sure that change happened for the better.
Wow.
That's that story.
I'm going to put a link up where you can get the book. It's on Amazon. It is a must read. And we are talking to the author. Joe, you look like you had a question before I go.
Yeah, I just so I have a friend who's in the Marines, and he we were talking about racism one time. Dear friend of mine, and he just said something that I appreciated. He said, in the Marines, the one thing that we have to remember is all of us are the color green.
Yep,
He
that's
was
what I
like,
thought.
yeah, and he said, when I'm at war, I don't care who I'm protecting, who's protecting me. I just want to be protected. And he just talked about that. But my other question for you is, why? I mean, why do you think it is that? I mean, as an African American male, I don't have a white experience, and we don't often talk about that. We talk about how whites don't have a black experience, which is true as well. But the true fact of the matter is, I don't know what it is to be white or to have that privilege. But I have my own thoughts about this. But why do you think that? That white Americans just aren't interested in having this dialogue?
That's interesting. I think it's an uncomfortable subject because we know it's true,
Mm.
and people don't like that. People don't like that talk about it.
Because most people would say it's. I mean, if they're not talking about it, they would say it's not true, or they would deny it. They wouldn't say that they don't like it because they know it's true. They'd say they don't think it's a necessary conversation because it's not.
That's a dodge.
That's a dodge.
That's a dodge.
I already ordered my book, by the way. It's on its way. That's why I got the link. So yeah.
Yeah. Well, I sold real estate for a while, and just as on the side, and I had a guy say to me one day, I knew him. We were good friends. I listed his house because I was his friend, and after we signed, the documents for the listing, and then as I'm going out the door, he says to me, "Be sure not to bring any blacks over here. We aren't going to sell any blacks." So I tore up the thing and gave it back to him, and he couldn't believe it. But it's there all the way.
See, I think that's important. What you just said is that when you hear something bad, that you have to address, or you see a situation, that you have to address the situation, and I don't think a lot of people are doing that, Bob.
Oh, I know. No, they're not. And you you just brought up my final exam, and for my both at high school and in the college. Everybody's worried about final exams. Their question, their final exam, was this: you have to promise me when you're in public, and somebody uses a racist joke or does something like that you will speak up. That was. If I got their commitment, that was their exam.
You know,
Go ahead.
when as I've been doing this book study, and I'm just grateful for this opportunity we've had. I've done an exit, evaluation and asking, people what their personal and professional commitments and yada yada yada. And that's been one of the main things is people saying just to speak, to not be silent anymore, to speak up when they see things, to use their voice and their influence. And I mean, I think all of us have to do that. Whatever influence. I mean, me being the only African American guy in this district and the other district that I worked in Muskegon, I spoke to 2 classes of students today just about my experience of being an African American. And these are kids who, besides me and 2 other people, they may never have another experience of an African American educator in their career. And so it's critical. A lot of times we want to go to places where I'd love to teach, in a Black school district, but I also think that I have a responsibility to make sure that people who don't look like me know the value of people like me as well.
Right, Bob. We talked before the show that when you wrote the book, it was 2006. That now that in 2021, and my question to you is, did you think when you wrote that book, did you think things would get better? But things have gotten worse. Did you think things would get worse, or in the current state that we are right now?
Well, I may answer this a little differently than I did before because no, I didn't. I thought that these efforts would. My thought was when I wrote the book, maybe I was naive. I thought when I wrote the book, people would say, "Oh yeah," they open their eyes. That didn't happen. Okay. But when we say things are worse now, I I don't even like to say they're worse, because I'm really happy that at least the racism is being exposed.
Right. Right.
Okay. It's not worse. It's just that we're seeing what's been going on all the time,
Yes.
and it's out in the public.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, that's encouraging,
Mm-hmm.
because we can't hide it. I'm just looking at my community here. I told you about the rebel name, and when that came to pass, I found a group of parents, mostly in their 40s, who jumped on this thing and supported me 100%. Men and women who had kids in school and realized that this is wrong, and they butted heads with the high school alumni sports groups, who said, "Oh, we can't get rid of the rebels. We won such and such a football game and all that sort of crap." So I'm encouraged by it. I'm glad that I'm not encouraged by the fact that we have shootings and all that stuff. And I think we need to do something about that. But I'm encouraged about the fact that racism has come to the front. It's being exposed.
But I think that's a great point. I've been in Muskegon since 1998, and here it is 2021, and for the first time we're having a public conversation about some things that really matter to at least a group of people, even though there may be people, it matters to everyone, but not everybody realizes that. And really embraced in some respects. And so I'm with you. I'm really excited to see some of the motion that's happening. Just, to get people to think and to challenge their own thinking and their own,
Joe, I don't know if you're familiar with the book, why are all the black kids sitting together in the cafeteria?
Absolutely.
It has the best description of racism that I've ever seen. When you read her book.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason I know it was good is because when I had the kids at the college level read it, they all got mad, and they didn't they thought that she was terribly attacking them.
Really?
The white kids. Oh yeah. So it's a great book, and
I actually read that when I in my ed degree. I read that when I was in college.
See, that's another book that I'll be ordering.
Her discussion of affirmative action is right on the money, and so it's I really like that book. That's
you in your book the second chapter you spoke about how many African Americans, and you went from one to another about the difference that they made in Vermont and why it was important to know these people. And I was going, a lot of the names I didn't know. And one of the things that came up wow. The second thing came up, I was like, how many people have done things in Michigan that I don't know? And how important is it for that perspective that we need to know our history?
Exactly. I'm trying to think of the one guy that owned property down in right on the waterfront, and I never heard of him until I interviewed a fella, a real estate man, and he told me about this fella who was African American, who was revered in his immediate area, but no one knew about him. So yeah, you're right.
So like when I think about the context of what I do, and I got to give a shout out to Sarah Buddy. My buddy she's on watching. She's one of my students that I had at the first school that I was at, and I was the first ever black teacher at Orchard View in the history of the district, Greg.
Mm-hmm.
And this is a young girl who I think she's 36 now. Has gone away. She's studying law. She's doing her thing, but her father passed away a few years ago, and she was talking to a friend. She just told me the story recently, and she said, "Yeah, well, when I get married, my dad is going to marry me." And her friend looked at her like she was crazy because her father's dead, and she's like, "Oh no, I mean Mr. Lane," and she calls me her other dad, right. And I don't take it lightly that I get to, oh, she's 34. Sorry, she just corrected me. I don't take it lightly that I get to be in relationship with people who are different than me, who may never see another Black man in that type of capacity. And it's critical.
Is
Right.
that
Bobby,
appeared
Bob-
on my screen? Is that lady who said she loves you?
Yeah, that's
34?
that's my baby girl.
right there. Bob, in the book, you talked about affirmative action and how a lot of the students that you taught at the beginning did not get why it was important to have affirmative action. It's in the book, y'all. I'm telling you, all these issues are in the book.
Yeah, the thing I like, the best way I describe short answer to affirmative action is that when Lyndon Johnson announced his program, he gave the analogy of taking a slave, removing his shackles, and having him run a quarter-mile race against a world-class sprinter.
Mm.
You know, they're both free and they're both able to run the race. What's the difference?
Mm.
And it just makes sense to me, you know. If you want to get in a hot topic, talk about with a group of white people, talk about white privilege.
Yeah, I would like to speak on that. You brought it up, Bob. I would like to speak on you to talk about it.
Well,
Some people say I get it all the time that there's no white privilege. Then I get the dodge. I love that. I'm going to use that from now on. I get the dodge. We're all God's people. There's no systemic racism. I get it all the time. Bob, I want you to speak to people about it.
well, I'm trying to find the piece of paper I have here on it. It's by McClin. It's called "Carrying the Knapsack."
I can make a statement while you're looking for that, Bob.
Go ahead, Joe.
So you just said something, Greg, that I found interesting. I've been reading this other book, and in the book, it's called Woke Church. The guy is saying, you know, we always talk about we just got to preach the gospel. We just got to share the gospel. The gospel is going to fix everything. And he said something. It just struck me. He said, if that's the case, then why do we talk about abortion as Christians? Why do we talk about homosexual marriage as Christians, but we don't talk about racism?
Wow. Pass the plate. It's getting deep in here. Pass the plate.
I mean, that was a statement that I had been trying to rationalize or figure out this thing that I was battling with in my head, and that was it. That's the piece that we choose the sin or the struggles or the issues that we want to talk about, and if it is just about the gospel, which obviously for me the gospel is the thing, but we have to name our sin, we have to name our issues, and for some people that issue is racism.
Yeah. Or of course, it comes down to where people are trying to find the quote bigger sin. Well, that sin is sin, and we can talk about that on another show.
Right.
But we got to get back to that, Joe. But Bob, back to you.
White privilege. It's called the article is by McIntosh, Mrs. McIntosh, and it's called "White Privilege: Unpacking the Invisible Knapsack." Peggy McIntosh is the name. And for example, I'm just going to read down some of the things she points out here. And this is as a white man. If I wish to arrange to be in a company of people of my race, I can arrange to be with people in the company of my race all the time. If I should need to move, I can be pretty sure of renting and purchasing housing in an area which I can afford and which I would want to live. I can go shopping most of the time, pretty well assured that I will not be followed or harassed.
Oh, yeah.
I'll stop there for a minute, and that we were talking about that. I said that in class, in my college class, and I got some pushback on it. Okay, so I said, okay, we'll do a little experiment this week. I want you to get. I think I I think I had, well, I only had a couple of black kids in the class, but there were enough African American students on the campus that knew I could do this. So I just said, find a friend of yours who's African American or a minority and go downtown and just go shopping. One white, one black. And they'd go in and they'd go shopping. They had no problems. Then I said, the next week, go down by yourself to the black kids and then report back to us what happened to you. And I want your partner to be standing outside the store observing what happens to you. Well, they came back with the same thing. The black kid couldn't get waited on. Were followed around in the store. A completely different experience from when they were in there with a white student.
Yeah, me and a friend of mine actually did that.
Yeah. There's a great movie on that.
Yeah.
I forget the name of it. It was really good though.
Well, they also did that Dateline documentary on that back in the 80s. And then right after that, a friend of mine and we went out and did the same thing.
Yeah.
Hey, Bob, there you go. Bob, I want you to speak to white people that might be listening or watching, or Caucasians and people, and speak to them, and because your books are solid. They're solid, but speak to them from racism, from like your book, from your eyes, and how do we correct it?
Well, I think the first, addressing to any of the people in the white audience, I think the first thing we have to do is recognize and admit that racism is present.
Right.
And the second thing we have to do is understand racism. Racism is a term, but there's different types of racism. There's a blatant racism, which is pretty easy to identify.
Mm-hmm.
Somebody uses a bad word and calls you a name, you know it. Okay, but then there's covert racism, and that's when the real estate guy is welcomes you and shows you through the house, but makes sure that you're not going to get he's not going to make sure that afterward you're not going to ever get that house.
Right.
Okay. Then there's the unintentional racism, which is racism that's just done to white people's just not understanding what's offensive. Okay, or making assumptions. I mean, I think I had a number of black friends of mine who are tired of being asked if they play basketball just because they're 6'2".
Wow.
Okay.
Wow.
That's that type of stuff. It's unintentional, but it's one of or are you a track star if he's long and thin, that type of stuff.
Hey, Bob, let me give you two examples. Number one, my uncle in Bloomfield Hill, he went to purchase a house, and now my uncle is a shorter guy, and the first thing that was told, the person asked him was, do you rap? Or do you play basketball? That's the first thing. Now, the second thing is to let you know that this stuff still exists. When we went to sell our house in the neighborhood that we presently live in, every house sells for top dollar plus, except when I sold my house, had to sell it for $30,000 under. This stuff still exists today, and the thing is that it drives me crazy when people say it never happens. It doesn't happen. I love the word that you use, that dodge, that word. Speak on that.
I'm glad you like it, because I got in a lot of trouble with people on that one.
Joe,
I can see that your head is spinning.
No, okay, so I've been black my whole life, right? So this is a new thing for me, but I've also been assimilated to white culture my whole life. Now, contrary to people in Muskegon's belief, I came from a predominantly black high school. I lived in a pretty diverse neighborhood. I was raised in the projects. I mean, everybody in Muskegon has only seen me work at two predominantly white high schools or schools, and so they don't know my background, and it doesn't matter to me. But I'm just so like excited about the fact that we're having conversations that aren't like adversarial, but that people are starting to just say, listen, let's just talk about it. I mean, if I can understand you better, then I'm going to appreciate you better. Every black person doesn't jump and run fast. You know, I had a kid ask me today, he's like, so Mr. Lane, do you think that black people are more athletic? I said, he goes, because, you know, football, black people play. I was like, not quarterbacks, not offensive linemen. I
Right.
said, it just depends on your position. And what you see is you see the role players that look that way. I said, our society has made us believe certain things. And so we've got to get outside of our box. And so I'm stoked, man. I mean, I think that outside of preaching the gospel, this is my life's mission, is to talk about racism, talk about diversity, and bring people, to an awareness, not in a way that we're just going to be angry at each other. I'm sick of that. I don't want to fight. I really want us to, you know, come to a level of understanding. And I believe that wholeheartedly that God has put me in some really unique positions to be able to.
Yeah.
I mean, I wore this shirt to work today and nobody even yelled at me.
I love that. I love
Yeah.
that.
Good. I love that. That's great.
Yeah, that's my wife's work, by the way. Shout
I
out
think
to
we
her.
hey, make one. Get Bob's size so we can send Bob one of those.
Oh yeah, what size you wear, Bob?
Extra large.
Extra large. We got you covered.
Yeah.
98 petty
Well,
man.
I like
And
to tell you,
maybe we have Sandy on. Get Sandy one too. Let's get Sandy one too.
she's
All right.
small.
Small.
All right,
I'd like
Bob.
to tell you a story. Have you
Go.
got a minute for a quick story?
Yes, we do. You
Okay.
get the last word, Bob.
Well, it was something that happened to me was really nice. It was a nice experience, and it was also an affirmation of some of my thinking. Well, Sandy and I went down to St. Lucia on our honeymoon, and when I got there, and we were at one of those Club Med places. I got there and immediately broke a tooth, so I had to go out and find a dentist. So this cab come pick me up and took me out into what looked like a jungle. Actually, I thought I was back in Vietnam because the little huts were very similar to what we had with green paneling. And so I got there and I walked into this place and where the doctor was, and I got into the waiting room, and I was the only white person there. And everybody was looking at me. You know, I just stood out. So I figured, then I noticed that there was a woman or somebody behind a curtain or behind a desk who I couldn't see, but she'd call out numbers. And when a guy's number was called, he'd go do his thing. He'd go see the doctor or see the administrator. Now, I didn't have a number. So I figured, well, I'll just sit here. I stand out. Somebody will come speak to me. So finally, after about a half hour, the voice behind the curtain said, sir, can I help you? And I said, yeah. So I walked in. Into this office, and there was a white woman who was the secretary, secretary at the desk. She was the one who checked you in. And I said to her, well, how are you? She said, fine. Where are you from? I said, I'm from South Burlington, Vermont. And she said, I grew up in St. Albans, Vermont, just 20 miles from you. Well, that was nice. But then the key point was there was two doctors there. One looked like Sidney Poitier, and the other one was a white doctor who looked like he was hungover and hadn't shaved. Guess which doctor the girl gave me to? I would have much preferred Sidney Poitier. Because when that guy said, how are you? If I'd been wearing a flower, it would have wilted. But what was the assumption she made?
Wow.
You know?
But I think that assumption is that one of the things that happens in our society is people respond to, take to, help people like themselves.
Yeah.
And so when you're a white person, you assume that people want,
Listen, guys, we are getting to the point where we have to wrap it up. Bob, I just want you to know, like I told you, you have a new best friend. We're heading to Vermont. And I've already told Sandy, and I'm gonna put her on the spot. Hi, Sandy. That you will probably see us in Vermont. And the second thing I want to tell you is you have an open invitation to talk on this show anytime. And on behalf of the radio station, the staff, and our 6-month anniversary, we want to thank you for this great conversation. I want to end with this, that the only way that we're going to end racism is it's going to be direct dialogue. And when you have people with those jokes, is that you take a stand and say, this is not appropriate. Listen, you've been watching Torn in Two. My guest, Robert Walsh, his wife, lovely wife, Sandy, Pastor Joe Lane, Pastor, your church,
New Life Christian Center, right behind Hackley Hospital, Hoyt Street.
and of course, your host, Gregory T. Roberts. Thank you so much. We'll see you next week. Take care, you guys, and God bless.
God bless. That was wonderful.
On behalf of everyone in our community and in